So I worked a week and a half straight and stayed up for 48 hours to finish this video for Euphoria, and after sleeping for a couple of days, Bryce is back, refreshed, and he's ready to make a part 2, and I'm gonna stop talking about myself in third person. So here's part 2 to my analysis on Euphoria Season 2. Also spoilers. I made a post on my community tab and the rest of my social media accounts asking you guys if you had any more questions about Euphoria Season 2 that have been tragically left unanswered. And the first question I wanted to address is, what the was Ash thinking? This is a great question. I've already talked about the ramifications of Ash's actions in part 1 of this video. How Fez will most likely go to prison because he cleaned off the murder weapon and is seen holding it when the cops come in, which from a legal standpoint is not good. If we see Fez go to trial next season, the only person who could vouch for Fez would be Faye, or the other cops who watched Fez try to talk Ash down. But after the police also watched their partner die after Ash gave him a shotgun shell to the chest, there's probably no chance any of them would make Fez look better on the report. So the last person who could save Fez would be Faye. And there's no denying that Faye would have Fezco's back. But it's easy to forget that the entire reason Faye was staying with Fezco and Ashtray is because she needed a place to hide after she pushed a motel manager off a balcony. So Faye's side of the story will most likely not be taken into account, as she may be on trial herself after committing a really bad crime and then fleeing from that crime scene. Wow, the writers really dug themselves into a hole with this one, especially if they expect to bring back Fezco next season, which they will definitely have to since he's a crowd favorite, and they've already established the culturally iconic Fexi or Flexi, or I can't keep up with the hip young vernacular of you all. I may be 25, but I have the spirit animal of a 97-year-old turtle stuck on its back while trying to cope with an astigmatism. But anyway, we're talking about Ash and why Ash did what he did. This is a harder question to answer, especially knowing that Ash didn't say a single thing other than uttering the word no during the entirety of episode 8. So Ash telling his reasoning to Fez is completely off the table. Quick recap for those in the back. Ash stabs Custer without knowing Custer is an informant for the police. Actually, he probably knew he was an informant, but what Ash didn't know is that the cops were listening. They were especially listening to the part where Ash stabbed Custer in the throat. And those who aren't familiar with crime, this is bad. By the way, some people think that in season 2, episode 7, Custer placed an additional listening device in one of the plants right here. But I don't think he did place another listening device, because if he did, it would be way too subtle of an action. If a second listening device was going to come into play later on, then the production would have done a better job at drawing some attention to it. Also, Custer having the cops listen in on his phone makes Lori and Brucey's way of searching for a wire pretty antiquated at this point. Fez wanted to take the blame for Ash's crime, but in his own way, Ash turns down that offer. Then Ash proceeds to get every weapon on the West Coast to have a shootout with the police, which subsequently ends with him getting shot in the head, or face to be more exact, or forehead to be super duper exact. Since the beginning of this season, Ash has always expressed violent behavior. We didn't really see him go this hard on being recklessly violent in season 1, but that's just because he was more off to the sidelines like Kat in season 2, or McKay in every season of Euphoria. But if we look at Ash's upbringing, we see that the woman who raised both him and Fez was extremely violent. If she had an issue with someone, she would walk over to them and then beat them or shoot them. While we only see Fez witness his grandma continuously handing out these beatdowns, it's possible that Ash witnessed a few of these grandma attacks himself, or maybe just heard stories about their grandma. Either way, their grandma continuously justified her unethical behavior to her kids, and we know that her reasoning rubbed off on Fez later on. Like how their grandma tells Fez that McDonald's gave their uncle diabetes, and way down the road, Fez is still bringing up that story to justify his drug deal operation that he inherited from their grandma. So it seems to be generational, as Fez is teaching the same principles to Ash, as well as continuing to fulfill the role of his grandma by giving people like Nate Jacobs a public beatdown. There's also these parallels between Fez and his grandma doing business, where Fezco's situation goes from this
brings a kid to a drug deal.
He ain't a kid. He's my partner.
to this.
Says the guy who brings a kid to a drug deal.
That's not a kid, that's my business partner.
I like Fez as a character, But yes, he is a terrible role model, and he's unfit to raise a child. Fezco's grandma started beating up Bullcut Man with that crowbar of hers, and for a reason Fez couldn't fully understand, he ran over to his grandma to stop her, which resulted in Fez getting hit in the head. It's like a reoccurring thing now, that Fez just keeps getting hurt when trying to stop the people that he loves from getting unnecessarily violent. Though Fez was brought into a bad situation, it seems like he at least had enough time to develop some sort of empathy and emotional understanding when it comes to getting violent. Fez either beat to death or severely injured Mouse's supplier only because he had no other option left. Like a good soldier, Fez only takes action when it's absolutely necessary, and when he is left with no other choice. With the exception of Nate Jacobs, obviously. But when Fezco's brother goes to war, he's the kind of soldier that, you know, commits war crimes. Fez liked that his grandmother didn't treat him like a kid, so he treated Ash the same way. And that's the point. Ash never got to be a child. So Ash didn't have the proper amount of time to emotionally develop like Fez, as Fezco barely got a chance to. Ash, being a kid, was always going to act on emotion rather than logic. Granted, Ash was right when he killed Mouse. As I mentioned in part 1, Mouse was already pushing a lot of product onto Fez, more product than Fez could ever handle, and on top of all of that, Mouse was growing suspicious of Fez after he got raided. And rightfully so. Even Mouse's right-hand man, Custer, ends up becoming a snitch for the police. So developing trust in their industry is rather difficult. I think Fez's plan of robbing the supplier was so crazy that it actually could have worked. But when he ends up giving the supplier a beatdown, it ruins everything. Mouse's supplier is possibly killed or arrested. And then, Mouse gets handed a bunch of bloodied stacks of cash. When Fez hands over this literal blood money to Mouse, it was more of a short-term solution to a long-term problem. And I would actually consider it to be more of a Hail Mary. With Mouse already being suspicious of Fez and getting handed blood-covered cash, I believe Mouse would be able to put 2 and 2 together and figure out what happened to his supplier later on. So in terms of the drug dealing hierarchy, distributors like Fez are more expendable. And if Fez is willing to take out the supplier, imagine how a middleman like Mouse would feel about his own safety upon this discovery. Meaning Mouse was going to kill Fez, and Ash did make the right call. And we all know Custer deserved a punch to the nose, or sorry, hammer to the nose. But Ash got lucky with Mouse. Icarus over here was going to keep flying too close to the sun. Ash clearly wasn't thinking long term, and only understood how much he messed up the moment Fez pointed to Custer's phone. Even though Ashtray didn't get a chance to explain the reasoning behind his actions, the actor who plays Ashtray gave his thoughts on why Ash went through with having the shootout. In an interview with Variety, Javon Walton, aka Ashtray, went on to explain that Ashtray decided to do his own thing because he wanted what was best for him in that moment, and that was selfish of him. At the end of the day, he's a kid, you know? A lot of people see him as this adult, but he's very vulnerable, and we see that at the end of the last episode, and he does not want to go to a foster home. That's another thing. Ash knew he messed up, but he also didn't want to see his brother go down for something he did. After shooting the officer and seeing that Fez got caught in the crossfire, Ash was brought back into reality. It's so crazy how the last time we see Ash before his death, he gives the most innocent look we've ever gotten from him. It was the one time he left his guard down and appeared to look like a kid who just made a mistake. This brings us to our next question that I've seen a lot of people ask. Is Ashtray actually dead? My answer is a big ol' yes, he is dead. It looked like he got a bullet to the dome, and Fez looked pretty defeated after witnessing it. However, in that one interview with Variety, Javon Walton was asked this very question. His answer was, there's definitely hope for Ashtray to still be alive, because if there's somebody who could take a bullet in the show, it's Ashtray. Ashtray is one badass kid. He's not playing around. I believe he has a shot about being around for season 3. And look, I get it. Ashtray's death wasn't shown on screen, but I'm gonna be firm when saying that Ash is as dead as my hopes and dreams. What was in the letter Fez was gonna give to Lexi? You can see right here that the officer steps on a letter that was addressed to Lexi. Clearly something Fez was gonna hand her after the play, along with the flowers. There's sadly no way of knowing what's on this letter. Also, it doesn't really matter what's written on it. It could be a congratulations from Fez, it could be him confessing his feelings, but the main purpose of the letter is to make this incredibly tragic shot that's symbolic of what Fezco is forced to leave behind. I want to talk about Rue and Lexi's conversation regarding the trauma they went through with their fathers. A conversation that happens because Rue was strongly affected by Lexi's play. But then wait, how is it that their conversation is part of the play if it happened after the play. Oh my god. Well, it wasn't the first time this kind of thing happened. Like when Fez drops the flowers he was gonna bring Lexi, and then the flowers appear on stage. This conversation between Rue and Lexi was the last scene of the play to solidify Rue's revelation and better understanding of herself that she achieved by watching the portrayal of her life. The play was just a tool to communicate more information to the audience, as in us, not this audience. It's implied that this audience is watching a cohesive narrative, but for us, it's an artistic blend of reality and fantasy to convey what the characters are experiencing, which is completely in character for Euphoria. I thought it was poetic how in season 1 episode 2, Rue finds herself on that stage, as she is asked to tell the class a 5-minute story about her summer as part of an improvisation exercise. However, Rue is unable to say anything as she's overwhelmed with memories of torturing her family with her addiction. The only other time we see Rue talk about these dark memories of hers is with Ali, where Rue reflects on these very unflattering memories, like punching her mom in the face and threatening to kill her mom with a piece of broken glass. Rue uses these memories as ammunition against herself, to further convince herself that she is past the point of no return. Up until this point in special episode, the only other person telling Rue that she can turn her life around is Ali. Even though his words have impact, he's still just a single voice amongst the rest of the noise. Then when Rue saw Lexi's play, she was able to further convince herself of what Ali has been preaching to her this entire time. I mentioned before that Lexi put on the play to cope with her trauma, creating something, while Rue just ended up destroying things to cope with her trauma. And for that reason, Rue is a little envious of Lexi's ability to turn that trauma into something useful and healing. But Rue, speaking from the perspective of an addict, goes on to tell Lexi that her father must be waking up every morning thinking that he wants to get better for his daughter. Something Lexi definitely needed to hear. And the only person that could tell her this is someone like Rue, because Rue is telling her the truth and speaking from her own experience with addiction. By doing this, Rue helps Lexi cope with the loss of her dad, the same way Lexi helped her, making Rue's regretful part of her life not for nothing. I thought it was really powerful how Rue and Lexi are learning how to heal from their past, while also learning how to help each other pull through. We end season 1 with Jules abandoning Rue, and we end season 2 with Rue choosing to leave Jules. In both cases, they were both looking out for their own mental health. The last shot we see in season 1 consists of Rue rising to the top of the bodies of a choir, and then falling off the edge as if she's falling into the earth. Compare that to the last shot we see in season 2, where Rue is walking outside of the school. We see way more of the sky, as we are presented with a less claustrophobic shot with way more headroom. Even though it's implied that Rue is eventually going to relapse, it's more of an optimistic shot to end on. It's not meant to be the walking into the sunset happy ending kind of shot, but more of the I'm making progress to get better kind of shot, which is a nice contrast from how they ended season 1. Something I very much appreciate is how they barely showed Maddie and Cassie's fight. We really only see the aftermath of a much needed release of aggression. Many people, including myself, interpreted Maddie and Cassie as this angel versus demon trope, being these demonic and angelic figures in service of Nate. In fact, in episode 4, when we're seeing these characters from a metaphysical perspective, Cassie's shot is inspired by Mexican murals depicting religious figures. Also, let's not forget how her character was introduced in Lexi's play, and people have an issue with Maddie and Cassie being treated like this. But isn't that the point? That's why it's almost liberating for Maddie to tell Cassie that it's just the beginning. Maddie is growing up and moving past people like Nate, but still has sympathy towards her best friend who's going down the wrong path. Nate wanted to turn Cassie into this hybrid of Maddie and Jules, and you can even assume that in Cassie's desperation, she wanted to become just like Maddie. Cassie was always seen as someone who gets taken advantage of and continuously exploited. Like the second Cassie gets on stage, the first thing we hear from the audience is Maddie had this way of exuding confidence and turning her sexuality into something empowering, while Cassie lacked that confidence and self-respect. So whether Cassie fully understands it or not, she transforms herself to become Maddie by dating her ex-boyfriend and dressing exactly like her. It's interesting how incredibly intimate moments from Rue's life were depicted in Lexi's play. Yet Rue set her ego aside and owned what she did and who she was. Though I am curious as to why Lexi wasn't sure if recreating the carousel scene in front of her entire school would cause Cassie to try to kill her, I don't think Lexi's intent was malicious. If anything, the play was probably showing Cassie in the same light as Rue. But it shows us that Cassie is still masking up her trauma, and like Rue in season 1, is avoiding facing the things that make her insecure and ashamed of herself while pursuing other toxic endeavors. Nate is Cassie's drugs. And guess what? Nate's also suppressing his trauma in a similar way, as Nate was severely messed up by his dad. Nate's also in denial about his sexuality, and he's illuminated in this red light when watching the holding out for a hero moment during Lexi's play. Then we see Nate with this red thumb drive that contains all of Cal's videos, the color red being indicative of the anger and resentment he has towards himself. So the thumb drive is a way of directing that anger and frustration towards his dad. As I expressed before, him getting rid of his dad and essentially taking over his life isn't going to solve anything. Nate must have had this thumb drive and other copies for a while now, which is why Nate was completely unfazed when he saw that Cal had taken all of the CDs out of his desk. You could say that the thumb drive is arguably worse than the gun, which is why Nate's not using the gun on his dad. The gun must have just been for Nate's own protection, as he's still somewhat afraid of Cal. And we saw in season 1 that Cal could easily win against Nate in a fight. It was fitting that in episode 8, they cut between Nate loading his weapon and Ash loading his weapons. A nice juxtaposition between someone who is very calculated and someone who isn't thinking about the longevity of their decisions. I find it quite poetic how Cal is always making the threat that he knows the chief of police.
Look, Cassie, I'm more than happy to get the chief of police, Bill Greenwood, involved, old family friend.
But then in season 2, episode 8, the officer to arrest Cal is no one other than the chief of police, Bill Greenwood. Who the heck is the third child in the Jacobs family photo? Since the pilot, we've seen this photo with Nate, his brother Aaron, their parents, and oh yeah, this random third child. Cal taking this photo with him in season 2, episode 4 called more attention to the fact that we don't know who this mysterious extra sibling is. I made a mistake in part 1 of this analysis where I said that Nate discovered his dad's video collection at the age of 8 or 9, when he actually discovered it at the age of 11. Nate was consumed by this darkness at the age of 8 or 9, possibly telling us that they lost that child when Nate was around that age. However, his mom seemed absolutely clueless as to what caused this change in Nate, so if their brother died around the time where Nate was 8 or 9, the mother wouldn't be questioning anything, because no one's that oblivious. Sadly, there's nothing hinting at who this son is yet. Also, some of you are asking why Elliot's song goes on for so long, but if you ask me, I don't think it goes on long enough. Anyway, those are all my thoughts today on Euphoria Season 2. If you want to see more of these Euphoria videos, let me know in the comments. And if you learned something today and you like this channel, definitely subscribe, support this channel, please. Thanks for watching.